Thank you. Good afternoon. And on this glorious Northern Californian day of sunshine, my name is Charlotte Fonrobert, and as you know, or many of you know, I'm the director of the Taubi Center for Jewish Studies. And I'm very super delighted to welcome you, welcome back to Stanford Jewish Studies, chef and author and food blogger and many other things, Michael Twitty, as this year's Jewish Community Federation and Endowment Fund speaker. Somewhere I've seen you, Michael, described as an itinerant culinary scholar. And I know you're coming from a long journey around the globe and the country, so I'm not sure how to say where you are coming from right now, although of course you do have home base and a family, so we'll hear about some of this. So Michael has a much better and more eloquent way to introduce himself to you, but I would not be doing COVID to you, Michael, if I did not say just a couple things. So most of you know Michael for his published work and many appearances on social media, TV, and so on. Most recently, perhaps, in Henry Louis Gates' series on the African Americans, Many Rivers to Cross. Some of you may know him because you love preparing food for Jewish and whatever reasons. Some of you because you are genuine foodies and you're excited about new ideas about Jewish foodways and other foodways. Some of you because you are concerned about repair or tikkun and continued rebuilding of the relationships between Jewish and African American and Black communities, whether familial or friendly relationships. And there may be just many, many, many more reasons in the room. So I'll just mention a couple things that we all know Michael for and that we want to came here to hear about. The food blog that he started in 2010, Afro Culinaria, beautiful, wonderful blog. And then the two books, the wonderful book that came out in 2017, I believe, The Cooking Gene, A Journey Through African Culinary History in the Old South, which won the James Beard Award for Writing and Book of the Year, and describes Michael's personal mission to document the connection between food history and family history from Africa to America, from slavery to freedom. And then last year, in 2022, Koshersoul, The Faith and Food Journey of an African American Jew, which won the National Jewish Book Award, and how wonderful is this published work. So the generosity I want to mention of his neshama. He came to my class yesterday and worked with our undergrad students, all 22 of them, none of whom have had brought with them great food preparing skills. And he did the same 4 years ago and worked with them very patiently on making some recipes from the Koshersoul recipe book, and they had the time of their life. One of them said afterwards, this is one of the best educational experiences that they had at Stanford. Before I hand it over to Michael, I want to say just a couple thank yous, which of course first and foremost goes in terms of funding this event to the Jewish Community Federation and Endowment Fund, with a special thanks to Miriam Rowland, one of our wonderful donors. I want to thank especially also my staff at Jewish Studies, my assistant director, Dr. Shana Hammerman, wherever there in the back, and Eva Clem, our events coordinator, worked very hard to put this together. And I need to thank also the folks at Kosher Dining Hall. I'm not sure whether they're in the room, because they helped, especially yesterday with the class event, Chef Darren, Chef Israel, and Philomena Perez, to help us put this together. So thank you especially to you all, and then for everyone coming. But most of all, Michael, thank you to come back to Stanford, and you haven't lost your patience with us at the tail end of your long journey. So I'll hand the podium over to you. Please help me welcome Michael Twitty.
Thank you, everybody, for being here at the key traffic hour. I'm very grateful for your presence here. So I've decided to do a really quick sort of rough draft intro to what this is all about, and then open as soon as possible for Q&A. So I'll probably talk about 25 minutes plus, and then we can open it up. So I'm going to do the who, what, when, where, how format. Okay. So lots of caveats. Lots of, okay, before we have a real conversation, this is what we need to know. So the first one is, who am I? So those of you who don't know me, I self-describe myself as a culinarian because I am not a professional chef in the sense of I am not those brave folks who are on a line every day. That's not my world. I've been lucky to do a couple of pop-ups. I've been lucky to guest star in Mashama Bailey's kitchen and a couple of others. But that's not my life. I never wanted to be on the hook for anything immediate and be responsible for that. You know, my cooking is the cooking of my grandmother, you know. It's slow. It's not to order. It's you show up, what I got is what you're gonna get. And that's all there is to it. There's, you know, I will make allowances for allergies or dislikes, but I'm not in hospitality. That's not my world. So people come at me with that hospitality angle. I'm just like, that's not how we do this. Another element is that a lot of my cooking and food work is through the lens of living history. So I live in Virginia. I'm from the D.C., Maryland, Virginia area. The DMV, as we like to call it. You got DMV, you're like, wait a minute. To California, that's the worst place in the world, right? So in that space, I grew up with a lot of museums, a lot of universities, and a lot of black culture and academia and community. I also grew up with a fairly large Jewish community. So a couple of days ago, Charlotte was referring to me being in Mississippi, and before that, UNC Chapel Hill, with my good friend and mentor, Marcy Cohen Ferris, her husband, Bill Ferris, who used to direct NEH. And I was able to kind of hear back, played back to me, kind of like my origin story, but kind of like the reason why I came out the way I did. It's because I came from a community that was diverse by default. Everybody on my little street had a different phenotype, a different religion, a different language. I don't remember what it was like not to help build the sukkah in the fall. I don't remember. These things are just like, so when people kind of go, I'm like, I didn't grow up in a little red-lined, the Jews live over here and the blacks live over here community. I grew up in Kent Mill and Wheaton, where the Orthodox world and everybody else is side by side. And there's a conservative shul and reform shul on the way to the 4 Orthodox shuls in that area. And there are about 60 in the entire DC area. Surprise, surprise. So that's what I came through. Living history has provided me a vehicle for talking about food and our origins with it. And I say with it because the cooking gene is largely about my family and food journey melded together, as Charlotte said. So I guess I need to go back a little bit in time, because now it's been a decade, and that's a weird feeling. In 2012, I initiated a crowdfunding campaign to go across the American South looking for my food and family roots and routes. And at the same point in time, I was able to attend the Roger Smith Cookbook Conference. Everybody who was anybody, Melissa Clark, everybody from the New York Times, everybody from NPR, everybody who had published any major thing on food was there in academia and outside of it. And it was extremely exciting. At the same time, it was full of microaggressions. I am one of 5 men of color in a crowd of 300, and I'm the only black male in that crowd. And I'm trying to figure out a way to enter into the world of writing about food. Well, I was so excited when I went to the new books and new ideas panel. We had a whole diverse panel of 5 white women who had upper class, let's get it straight. And they're sitting up there telling us, this is gonna be, y'all are gonna laugh. If you have 900, I can't talk to you if you don't have at least 900 Twitter followers. Well, that's hilarious now, isn't it? Because if you say you have 900 followers on Instagram or Twitter, they really ain't gonna talk to you today. But that was the line. And then one particular person on the panel said, we want news stories from new faces about new things. And so I was so excited, and I ran up there. You know how you get the little 2 minutes, if that, with the people on the panel and hand your business card? I went up there, and Miss Lady was like, oh, I already knew. And so I said, I have this great project I'm working on about my family history and food. And she stopped me dead in my tracks. She goes, so the question is, would anybody really be interested in your family? Okay, girl. Then she pivots and turns to her other white friend, and they have a conversation. Then she eventually gets back to me a minute later, flippantly hands me her business card and says, call me sometime. I never did. But I knew then what my mother taught me, my father taught me, 3 times as good to be just as good was going to apply going forward. And I was just, I felt some kind of way. And I went downstairs and I saw someone who I know well who said to me, the problem is you're just a lot of things. Translation, intersectional. And no one knows what to do with you. And I just sat there kind of mulling that over. And I just kind of figured out, okay, if you don't figure this out, that door is not going to be open for the next person who is complicated. Excuse me, we're not complicated, we're just American. We live in a multicultural society, and guess what? Black people are complicated and smart too. And black people are just like you. I got really tired of people focusing on how come you're Jewish, when the reality is, the question is, how come more black people who are actually halakhically Jewish don't report themselves as such? That's a more uncomfortable and real conversation if you want to have one, and I'm all for it. I'm also gay too, so you know about that part. The snaps are for a reason. So, I just said in my head, if you don't do this, the world's not going to depend on you to do this. This is not your job. But if you don't lend your hand to opening this door, other people with layers of identity who really want to tell their story are not going to be able to tell it because they're not going to have the confidence to do so, because the same people are going to tell them, nah, meh. And most people, including myself, have layers of self-doubt that are walls between them and expressing their truth. And so therefore, they're not willing to be vulnerable because it's scary. They don't want to tell their truth because they think no one's going to want to listen. And they shut their own door, let alone the door being shut on them by various parts of the world. So I said, I have to write a trilogy now. The first one is going to be about this journey that I want to go on. I hadn't gone on the Southern Discomfort Tour yet. But by that spring, we raised more than enough money, and I was able to do that. It wasn't going to be a book yet. It was just an experience. And then I said, I've got to write about being black and Jewish, and I have to write about what a queer kitchen means, what queer people in the kitchen translates out to, and our relationship with food. Because I don't want anybody to be able to say, well, not you. because I looked around that room and I saw 300 plus people, most of whom didn't look like me. And for the most part, I think it was myself, Tanya, Donna, Tony Tipton Martin. Yeah, there were 5 black people. I could name all of them with one hand. So that was another layer of just like, okay. So the 3 books that I have out now are The Cooking Gene, Rice, and Koshersoul. The Cooking Gene tells the story, as Charlotte said, of my family, going back to, at this point, the 16th and 17th century in Europe and Africa, and following up through historic America. And I basically want a culinary version of Alex Haley's roots. May he rest in power. And, you know, telling that story and doing the DNA test cost thousands of dollars. I paid thousands of dollars to find out things about myself that essentially somebody several hundred years ago decided, nope, we're going to cut this off. We're going to destroy this. This will never be a conversation. And so I felt very amped. And I remember there was a moment leading to the book where I had a kind of a one-sided non-exchange with Paula Deen. And that went viral. And I'm kind of glad she didn't respond because she didn't want to change. And that's cool. You know, hell has room. And as my grandmother used to say from Alabama, that's why God made gutters. Keep the trash on its own side. I didn't stutter, and I said what I said. But I'm being pointed because the conversation wasn't finger wag, finger wag, finger wag. It was, let's have a conversation. Conversations are not surrender. Conversations are not submission. But if you don't want to have one, I know where you stand. And the opportunity was a gathering at Stagville Plantation outside of Durham, North Carolina, which is also known as the Benahan Cameron historical site. And the relevance of that site is that it was one of the largest, if not the largest, plantation in North Carolina. In fact, 1 of every 10 black citizens of Durham to this day has an ancestor who was on this plantation. It was, I think, 10,000 acres at one point with 900 plus enslaved people. And there are 5 remaining dwellings. They want to raise money to preserve those dwellings, which are haunting. And that was the place where I had invited her to. She did not, you know. But we had an incredible day among black interpreters as a community and the entire diversity of Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill showed up to this event. And on top of that, I got my first 2 African ancestry results from my mother and father's side. And the reason why I did it there was because I told the crowd, and I told Gina Page of African Ancestry, I wanted to reclaim my roots in the place where it was taken from us. So I felt like standing beside those cabins, hearing those ancestors rejoice, was just the welcome mat I needed. So the Cooking Gene happens. After the viral thing, I have an agent, all these wonderful opportunities. But on the way to that comes a conversation with a certain large publisher. They were all excited about certain parts of the Cooking Gene, but mostly the parts where they thought I was going to wag my finger at other black people and preach to them about food habits and health, etc. And when they got to the word Jewish, they really had a problem. Now, you must be wondering, who were the people in that room? Of the 3, 2 were Jewish. And the editor, who was the main source, the gatekeeping editor, who was the main source of the problem, said over the phone, well, this is very complicated and it muddies the waters. Muddies what? They don't hear the layers of that word and all of that. Because when we hear that as black people, we think, oh, mud, dirt, filth, contamination, miscegenation, the mixing of bloods in an illicit way, lack of clarity, lack of truth. We hear all of that. So I was like, okay, I hear you. But then it was like, she said, and with a nervous laugh, Jewish, America's not ready for you. And I was hot, and I just said, I beg your pardon, my dear, but when your America showed up at Ellis Island, my America already built it. So you late. So we're not gonna have that conversation. I know you think you know what you're talking about, but the reality is that there are people like me all over the place. And I only wanted to mention all of my other identities in terms of the cooking gene because I didn't want to be, I wanted to, introduce myself to the world. One little chapter, and they were like, nope, can't talk about it. If you work with us, you can't even wear a kippah in public. You can't reference the fact that you're Jewish. And that's the point where I had a Sandy Koufax moment, and I was like, nah, I'm out. Because you're not gonna remake me. They love to do that. I can't tell you how many times you get that phone call from that television producer, that streaming network, or the book or magazine person, and they want to remake you as soon as they pick up the phone. They do not want you. They want what they think you can represent to other people. And that is something that sets my black and Jewish and gay antenna off. Like, nah, I came here to be my full self, and if not, then why bother? Why bother? So that's why I had to write Koshersoul, because I already had this one book where I touch on it, but I really want to go deeper into being a Hebrew school teacher for 15 years. That's why I have every gray hair in my head. And it was 7th grade and 8th grade for most of it, which is even worse. But I kid you, I love them so. They're almost all grown now, which is kind of crazy. And I also want to talk about what black and Jewish identity meant to me, and especially because I do work with food and history and living history and all this kind of good stuff. So Koshersoul is not a cookbook. And to that end, the terms that we're using here, Jewish, does not refer to my religion or my faith. It is not my church. It is not my belief system. Judaism is the religious civilization of the Jewish people. I'm going to repeat that. Judaism is the religious civilization of the Jewish people. It is not the totality of being Jewish. In the same way that black is not just my phenotype. Black is my recent genetic history. Black is the culture I was raised in. Black is the sensibility that I feel and commonality when I meet people from Africa and the Caribbean. Black is being part of the diaspora, the African Atlantic, African America all at once. I'm not one of these fools that runs out here doing diaspora wars. My rice ain't better than your rice. It's seasoned, so it's good rice. So we're all good. So those are important terms that I want to lay out right quick, because both terms get confused with one immutable thing. And the reality is, being a Jew isn't just, people go, on social media, it's really hilarious when somebody goes, how can you be atheist and be Jewish? Every Jew laughs. Because they're all like, you haven't met my uncle. You don't know my aunt. You don't know me. And that's very hard for people to understand, that there is an ethnic part, there is a cultural part, there's a religious part, there's a social part. There is, I didn't know I was, but I guess I am part. Talk to Madeleine Albright of late. She's one of many, many, many people who has that same story throughout history of not knowing until a certain point, oh yeah, here's the big secret. You're actually Jewish, and we hid it to protect ourselves. And guess who has that story a lot? Black people too. Okay, so the Koshersoul is not a cookbook. It does have 60 recipes, 65-ish, more than the cooking gene, and it does have a fully fledged out menus and ideas about food. Part of the reason why I didn't do a full-on cookbook is, you know what? One of the worst things you can have, experiences you can have as an author, is that moment when you go to Michael's or Target and your book is in the bargain bin. So you try to keep that book at the bargain bin as long as humanly possible. And you do it by winning an award and do what you got to do. So you do what you got to do. So that's the big thing. Also, cookbooks are not remunerative. Nobody makes money off of cookbooks, guys. You know, one of our, hi. By the way, the food was fantastic. Thank you all so much. Absolutely. There are some more, why are they standing? There's some more chairs. Come on, mishpacha, have a seat. Come, someone help them get chairs, please. Yalla. So, you know, cookbooks don't make you a lot of anything. The money that they give you basically goes to production, and that's on you. So that's why I don't do cookbooks. It's a lot better for me to do culinary memoir. And again, that genre, subgenre of food writing does not largely look like me. It is also not largely a male enterprise. That's another thing that's important. And that's, okay, men have taken over a lot of things, unfortunately. But also, we do need male voices in those spaces because there is a certain amount of vulnerability, honesty, and access that comes with food writing that you don't see in other, you know, there's lots of, I'm a brother, I went to jail, then I discovered journalism and something else, and I saved myself books. People salivate over that. What don't they salivate over? I was black, I was a blurred, I read books, and here I am. And I stayed out of trouble because my mama told me she would kill me, and that was good enough. And my daddy said, don't embarrass his family and your name. And so we deserve a voice too. Us, black, male, female, trans, and non-binary people, we deserve a voice too, those of us who don't have a tear-jerking, precious-like narrative. Those are important, don't get me wrong, because we believe in uplift. We believe in things that inspire people to get past their struggle, fictional or nonfiction. But we also need to know from everyday, regular people of color who have regular lives, who come from regular old people, that have a life. And we need to tell our story too. Okay, so where? I could not, when I wrote this book, I could not, oh, wait a minute, let's go back to food real quick. Let's do food real quick, yeah. So what food? What's the food we're talking about here? Especially black and Jewish food. So that for some people, that's a big question mark. I don't know why, because the African and Jewish diasporas have Venn diagrammed throughout history since day one. So I don't understand the confusion just because the majority of diasporic Jewish history has taken place in Europe, the Mediterranean, and the Middle East. But it still does take place in China, in India, in Ethiopia, in Yemen, and in many other places, and has expanded to Australia, Brazil, etc. So having said that, there is the practice of kashrut in Africa among the Beta Israel in Ethiopia, but there's also the practice of people who have other associations with Jewishness across the continent. Then there is kashrut as practiced with the diaspora. And that gets complicated because anytime, those of us who know how African diasporic culture works, or even West African culture works, understand, unlike the West, there's no sharp division between traditional Christian, Muslim, Jewish, etc. Whatever works, works. You have your core identity, and then you have these ancillary pieces that you weave in and out of your life. And no one thinks that that's somehow strange or corrupting. It just is what it is. Been to Africa 8 times. Every time there's a festival, everybody comes out. Everybody does their thing, no matter what their particular background is. And when you are in trouble in Africa, everybody goes to the traditional spirituality. Everybody goes to your ancestors. It doesn't matter what you are, bam, you go there. And to people who are from the West, it's but people who come from Southeast Asia understand, because there's layers of Buddhism, Hinduism, traditional spirituality, etc., ancestor worship. reverence, excuse me. So all those things are in one piece. And then there's the fusion food that was created here. So for example, I call it the Drive Miss Daisy phenomenon. So that's a real narrative about real people who at one point in time were far more populous than they are now. And I'm referring to Southern Jews who were born and raised in the South over generations, who had, by consequence, been heavily involved and engaged with the life of black folks. Sometimes it was exploitative, sometimes it was communal, sometimes it was reactionary, and sometimes it was familial. And so if you think about it, black and Jewish history in the Americas begins at the same time. So Columbus sails the ocean blue, 1492. Guess who comes with him? Black folks and Jewish folks who were escaping Spain. Also, Jews go to Brazil when the Dutch own it, because the Dutch were more sympathetic. And then they leave Brazil when the Portuguese show up and bring the Inquisition, and then they go to New York, New Amsterdam. When they're in Brazil, those of them who wish to fight this out or stay around are invited by Zumbi. Zumbi was the first sort of like American revolutionary in some ways, because he establishes a free maroon republic called Palmares, which was a quilombo in Brazil. And his name and the name quilombo show he comes from Central Africa. So he says to the Jews and Moors among who had come to Brazil, I don't care what religion you are, I don't care what culture you are, as long as you help me fight the Portuguese, you are welcome to be who you are and own land here. So that is a black man talking to Spanish and Portuguese Jews from the Netherlands who come to Brazil. In Mexico, black folks who are the jailers are the ones who are helping the Jews who are jailed because of the Inquisition either get messages out or escape. In Renaissance Europe and in late medieval Europe, there is a lot of evidence to suggest, that establishes that there were black people who were part of Jewish communities. In fact, when I was in the Netherlands in March, I was able to visit the grave. I think his name was Ezekiel. And he was a black Jewish man who was, part of his life, he was enslaved and lived in Amsterdam. But he wasn't the only one. There was actually a minion of black Jews in Amsterdam and London and in Italy and formerly in Spain and Portugal. So we're talking about a history that's been obfuscated and buried more than anything else. So there's that. You have these two diasporas, they're black people who were brought to India en masse, and there were also Jews in India. You get what I'm trying to say? So all these unexpected places, these two families were in close contact. And when I went, I lived formerly in Maryland most of my life, and at the Walters Art Gallery, there's an extraordinary exhibit called The Black Presence in Renaissance Europe. And so you went in there with the biggest painting was subtitled The Ghetto of Lisbon. And Lisbon at that time was kind of like the last holdout before the Inquisition shows up in the 1490s. The painting was like 1487, 1497, one of the two. At any rate, everybody in the painting is black or Jewish or in between. And I'm like, okay, so they're socializing, they're talking, they're fighting, they're trading, they're doing business. They got to be cooking and eating at some point too. Something's going on. And they're having conversations about being the other in that culture. So there's that. So all those things are things that I write about and talk about. And of course, we have to talk about the fact that there's innovation with Jews of color, Jews of African descent in food. Like, we have no problem kosherizing our dishes or making a mixture of Caribbean, contemporary African, Ethiopian. My kitchen, I call it Afro-Ashkefardi. It's a mixture of all the above. And quite frankly, that's kind of what Jewish food is. Jewish food is not just bagels, lox, brisket. Jewish food isn't hotly contested, parts of Israeli food, that Venn diagram with Palestinian food. Jewish food is not just Mizrahi and Sephardi food. Jewish food is actually all the above, and this exchange of culture and food throughout the centuries and time. So there's that. I had to write the book during the pandemic, which, at first, the big dream as we entered 2020 was, okay, I'm going to go interview people at their houses and take lovely pictures of their spice cabinet, and we're going to have nice little pictures and blah, blah, blah. Didn't happen. Most of the book, the interviews were conducted by phone and by Zoom. And I had to rely on my memory. I didn't even realize until this morning that the book is actually the 20th anniversary of me being part of the community. Like 20 years had passed by between 2002 and 2022. So there's that. So I want to interview people of various walks of life, get their opinions. Yvilla McCoy, who is a very strong voice, is in there, African-American Orthodox woman. There's Rabbi Sandra Lawson, who is a Reform, openly gay, black woman rabbi, also a veteran. I know more than just rabbis, I assure you. But people who are really making a difference, but also everyday people, chimed in and said, okay, this is what I make for dinner, or this is why I eat what I eat. And I interviewed white Southerners who were predominantly Protestant and had become Jewish. And the very fact that that conversation in many ways mirrored the conversation about kosher soul food was very strong. But then I interviewed Chef Shambra, who is part of the traditional, I love this boy, Orthodox Muslim community, Sunni Muslim community in Philadelphia. And so she's talking about her own family's journey from eating with the nation to becoming more Sunni Muslim to being from the South, but being in Philadelphia, Great Migration. And so we all have the same conversation in different pieces about dietary laws and about exchanges and changing and varying our food and our traditions, but also keeping true to our Southern roots. And Southern roots based in especially Black culture. And that includes the white Southerners who will freely admit it, without us, there's no Southern food or culture. So we were all on the same page. And so why do I even bring that up? Bring that up because we are in a time where people assume that just because you are different, you have nothing in common. But there are these things that undergird that are also part of the tapestry that we tend to ignore, that we see every single day, but we avoid looking at. What did Mahalia Jackson say? People see God every day, they just don't recognize him. So it's that kind of thing. These deeper truths are present and real. I went into this book with the attitude I wanted to tell as many stories as I could, but I couldn't tell everybody's story, even all of my own stories. And if you notice, there's some parts of it where I'm kind of like a little hesitant. I'm not ready to say certain things. Like I really wanted to go on a deep dive about the intersection between Blackness, gayness, and Jewishness. But then when I got to the computer, I was not as brave as I thought I was. But then I instead talked about the queerness of being Black in a Western society, the queerness of being Jewish. Queerness not referring to orientation, but referring to being the other, the outsider. And then the queerness of being queer. So I wanted to put all of that in there and make sure people understood. And with each recipe, I wanted to give an introduction. But I also didn't want to rewrite the book, not because of money and resources, but because here's one fact. People have already doing amazing work. Cookbooks, beautiful. You can find a ton of, kosher accessible or compliant, or, take one ingredient, flip it, and you can make it kosher. And in these beautiful, I give a huge bibliography, and I take the bibliography. so that people could see the sources. Share the wealth. Direct them to a Claudia Roden or a Bryant Terry or Jocelyn Delk or Tony Tipton Martin or whoever they want to go to, Joe Nathan, etc. So that's the kind of outline. I'm not going to overtalk it any further, but I want to kind of open things up to have a conversation. And so let's just do that. So Charlotte, you had a question or two you wanted to start with. And so I'm kind of like giving you the first question. Please. Thank you. 5:47, not bad. So, what would be that question?
Thank you. You answered everything.
No.
No. This was beautiful, Michael. I guess one question I wanted to start out with maybe is how did you get to the term, the title, Koshersoul, which is a beautiful, right, double entendre on the soul, and it's just such a beautiful way to capture, right, bring the idea of food bringing things together rather than having it become divisive, right, which you want to draw boundaries, but this sort of captures this attempt to bring it together.
So people assume that blacks and Jews are antipodal, right? An antipode is two spots on the map that are the furthest apart on Earth. And given the fact that anti-blackness and anti-Semitism have traveled together as the West's original sins, of course, there's the global sin of misogyny, don't get me wrong, and ableism, and queerphobia, et cetera, and classism, but the West's particularly good at inventing these two fears of the other, okay? So there's that. Koshersoul is my Twitter handle. As we all know, everybody wanted to have especially black folks, us in social media, we gotta have a name that nobody else has and a stamp on it, and it says just us. And so Koshersoul was my thing, and I nabbed it before anybody else nabbed it. However, there was an interesting program on Lifetime, if you remember, called Koshersoul, and it was really, really stereotypically, just gross. And it was a princess and a brother who was a comedian who totally looked the part of not knowing anything, who was becoming Jewish to marry this woman. And they first of all, you can have something on Twitter, but you've got to trademark your stuff. Because they did grab it and used it to title a show that was about a very vapid, unaware, unconnected Jewish woman and her ignorant, goofy black husband. And I'm just like, okay, so do you know how it feels when somebody goes, oh, you're a Hebrew school teacher, you just must teach the basic things. You know why they said it. No, sweetie, I don't teach the basic things. I actually teach parts of Gemara and Mishnah. And you know why I do? Because I had to be 4 times as good to be just as good. Not only that, but I welcomed the cultural challenge of being in a community where one's knowledge and one's searching elevates them. So I was going to use that for all it was worth. So, I pushed back on the show a little bit. The show went off the air before it even finished, but it was just gross. You've noticed you've never really seen actual representations of black Jewish people outside of, satirical comedy. And it makes me angry because little black boys say the Kiddush and little black girls are becoming rabbis. And black people are in those shuls all across this country. Almost, I can't go anywhere without seeing mishpacha, mishpacha, kinfolk, mishpacha. So I know we're out there, but can you imagine you've been in the country existing this way for 400 years, and nobody's even bothered to tell your story. Don't care. But the first black Jewish man we have in English records in early America, you know what it was? A police report. The brother was profiled. Solomon, the mulatto Jew, arrested for profaning the Christian Sabbath by walking on a Sunday. Sound familiar? That was in the 17th century. My, how times have changed. That's our Kunta Kinte, the guy who got arrested, the mulatto Jew, and they even spell mulatto right, for profaning the Sabbath in Boston. So miss me with the, well, you're black, but do you really experience anti-Semitism? And miss me with the reverse too. You know, you can probably guess in the most recent stuff with you know who. I ain't gonna say his name. You know, I loved him. And now I'm just like, okay, all right, thanks for creating a situation where I go on social media and people say things like, you know why we can't have strong male roles because the Jews, oh my God, okay, bye. That's what we're hearing. But I also have to now explain to African Americans who don't always understand that being Jewish is not just being white. There are layers to this. Sometimes you can pass, and other times, most times, you can't. And there are telltale signs to weed you out as not passing. And so it's not as easy as, oh, you look like that, you're immediately white, bye. Or the minute you say that, you're assuming that the default for Jewish is whiteness, which it never really has been. So you end up being this translator between these multiple audiences, let alone talk the conversation about queerness in Judaism or Jewishness. People go, is that a problem? It can be. I assure you, if you are intersectional, thank you, Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, you are definitely going to face some dreck in this life. Those of you who speak Yiddish know exactly what I just said. Okay. But kosher soul is important to me because, again, kosher, quasi-ethnic, soul, quasi-ethnic. So our concept of soul is not European, it's not Western. It comes from West Central Africa. Everybody has a word for that ethereal part of yourself. As I said in High on the Hog on Netflix, we call our cuisine soul because we wanted to name it after something that was invisible and ethereal like God. You don't know it until you feel it. People don't understand that about our culture. It's not a thing. It's not and we have the same kind of parallel between the two traditions, right? So someone once asked, who was it? Dizzy Gillespie, another jazz great. What's jazz? He said, I can't tell you. I can, either you know it or I can't, or feel it. I can't tell you. At the same point in time, was a story in the Mishnah, in the Gemara, that goes like this. It's in the Yerushalmi, and the Caesar goes, so, Rabbi, give me the spice that you Jews use to make the food on Shabbat taste so good. And he's like, there's no spice that I can give you. You have to honor Shabbat, or it's the same like spiritual ethos of you have to feel it, you have to be it. I cannot sell you a facsimile and then you can appropriate it and go on your merry way. You got to be about it, or it's not for you. And so in many ways, the two worlds either mirror each other or have this call and response. And that's what I try to show in the food and the recipes, but also in the conversations in the book. I mean, some of us get the joke when Shakespeare Show, one of my good friends, who grew up black and Hasidic, he says, some people, can't say this without laughing, some people are Menachem X's, and some people are Uncle Tevia's. And the rest of us fall in between. And I'm just like, only you could say it that way, sir. So yeah, another question. Anybody, come on. Yeah, sure.
So you grew up around Jewish people, and were you raised Christian up until a certain point?
I'm going to go like this. I have spent most of my life now in the Jewish community. I don't know about that. And I'm not being flippant. I'm just saying it like this. It's really difficult for me to sort of give my bona fides as a Jewish person because it got a lot more complicated when the cooking gene happened because I started getting all these DNA tests back. And so I could, throw down Jew by choice. But then I found out on mother's paternal side, I have over 20 cousins who have all 4 Jewish grandparents, and everyone comes from the Ukraine. Wow. But that was I'd already heard narrative that suggested that it had no DNA or scientific evidence to suggest that was true, but the oral history was there. But 15 years teaching Hebrew school, Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist, Renewal, Independent Havara, how many people have I buried, married, children have I seen named and breast? I'm Jewish, that's all. Another question. Hi.
Hi. Out of all the recipes that you ever tried all over the world, which was the two that you would say the moment you tried it, it was like heaven, like the real soul?
One or two? Okay, I must know. There's a lot more than that. That's really difficult. That's really difficult. But I can give you a slightly, more appropriate answer. Renee Redzepi had me as a guest to speak at the MAD Symposium, and I came to Copenhagen to do that. But when I sat down and had his food, I kind of put down my fork and I went, all this little cute, little innovative culinary stuff you're trying to do to be cute, you ain't never gonna do this. So stop trying. It was a really liberating moment. Because I was like, the service that he would set out with his team was just like the best service you've ever had in your life. I don't just mean generous and hospitable. It was swift and it was clear and you were navigated through this menu and everything came out, the aesthetics of his food was just incredible. And of course, this is not just his mind, this is his whole team's mind behind it. And I just said, you know what, I'm gonna stick to my little grandma cooking because this takes a lot. And I loved it because I got to visit the Nordic Food Lab and all that kind of good stuff. But it's okay, I don't have to be this to be great. Someone else is already doing this. I can be comfortable in my space and my lane. So that's a big example of that. I think another thing that kind of got me was every experience that I've had in West Africa, half of which is taking chefs, black chefs from here and the Caribbean and of Latin heritage to Africa for the first time. We took 25 chefs with us to Cameroon in March. And that was our 4th country. We did Ghana, Togo and Benin, Senegal and Gambia, and now Cameroon. And so we really wanted to make sure that they had the experience of being on the ground, learning from their cousins, and also our cousins learning from us. And every time I've done that, I've learned something new about myself, but also learn new things about flavor and about tradition. And, so in my home now, thank God I have one, I'm able to kind of orchestrate my kitchen around the fact that, in African tradition, food is in motion, the mortar and pestle. And I don't mean this guy, I mean, it's the grinding stone, it's all of that. And that magic that once you get it back, you can't give it up, is something that I import to all of the food that I make. Something I need to say before I forget about it, because I'm an adult with ADHD, is that I also try to construct and curate my table and my dining room and kitchen so people understand it is a black Jewish space. So the challah cover, where it comes from Ghana. And they'll see where my talits hang up. There's one from Sierra Leone, one from Ghana, one from Ethiopia, a Chabad one, and then B'nai Or, which I politely call the gay pride talit. And because it's rainbow. And I want people to understand where I'm coming from, because the kippot that I have in Mass are from an artist, and they have James Baldwin, Audre Lorde, and Zora Neale Hurston and Jackie Robinson on them. And I just want all these little signifiers of Mizrahi culture, Ashkenazi culture, African Jewish culture, African culture, to all be there to let people remind them whose house you in. You know what I'm saying? You know, we were saying in West African culture, if you sit down with me and eat, you'll know who I am. And then we say in the Jewish tradition, eat and be satisfied and bless the Lord. So all those worldviews come together for me constantly. And I look for that dialogue in my daily life, but also in my cooking process. Chicken is very Jewish. Chicken is very black. Yay. Easy. You know, we are such obnoxious, annoying people. I can't stand us sometimes. Like, I mean, oh my God, look in the mirror and like, oh my God, you're black, you're gay, and you're Jewish, get away from me. Because I'm just like, we're the same. We are incredible at resistance. We're satirical, we're ironic, we use humor. People think that they're laughing with us. We laughed at them a long time ago, and they figured it out like 5 years later, right? And we are ostentatious. We know about flair and flash. If you think I'm lying, go to a Seder in New York hosted by your gay bestie from Alabama. And there's black, Jewish, and everybody between people there, and everybody's trying to outflash each other. It's real. We are the only people who will be at dinner and talk about the last meal we had and the next one we're going to eat. And if you think about it, that makes complete sense when your ass is always on the run. Right now is, you know what right now is, but what is the past and what is the future? You know, we're also the only people who use legal fictions to guarantee a sane eating experience. Okay, what do I mean by that? If you are black, chances are you have eaten something suspect, but used hot sauce as the vehicle. I knew I was going to get you with that one. I knew I was going to get you with that one. And then, if you are Jewish, yes, you could eat Gold's horseradish right out the jar. But that would be considered meshigah. So, in order to have a legal fiction to say I am not meshigah, you actually use gefilte fish, a form of Jewish medieval torture, to convey the horseradish from the jar into your mouth, because otherwise the consumption of the horseradish by itself or the gefilte fish by itself, the frankenfish, would not make sense. And then the same narrative pops up. So why do we have to eat this? This is because when the Tsar chases out of Russia, all we had to eat, I mean, for God's sakes, Passover can be summed up in one phrase. Don't give me that garbage. Oh, we were slaves to Egypt and Pharaoh. No, we had a bad meal 3,500 years ago, and we're still complaining about it. This is the bread of affliction. Well, dang. Okay, that's all we got, huh? Okay, then there's all this factor. Okay, well, I forgot the other version. Granddaddy, why we gotta eat that? Because back in Mississippi on the plantation, all we had was the guts as we made soul food of it. It was complete nonsense. But, it worked for that moment. Okay. Then comes this. My late mother of blessed memory, my most beautiful human being in this life. Eat this. Why? It's awful. Why do I want to eat it? Because, Jewish version, eat it. It's terrible. Why do I want to eat it if it's terrible? Eat it. It's terrible. Why? Why do blacks and Jews always think we have to eat our oppression? What is going on with this? Then I figured it out. It's our elders' way of teaching us there are really good, beautiful, wonderful times. And they should be savored as they are. But you should know what awful tastes like. So that you have that taste in your mouth, so you should never want it again. That's a very black and Jewish thing. That. And then the house smelling like chicken, that too. I was like, if my house doesn't smell like challah, chicken, and collard greens at all times, I'm failed. Like that is the, and yeah, I told her class that when I saw the opening of the Chabad Children's Museum in Brooklyn, I'm not kidding you, they had a Febreze spray, something like that, and it was a smell of fresh challah. Y'all know I tried to steal that, right? I was like, I can get anywhere in this world smell like fresh challah. Like Jewish axe spray. I don't care what you're talking about, whatever it is, I'll write you a check. Come on. You smell like fresh bread. That's awesome. That's good. So yeah. I know we're kind of like whatever for time, but what else we got?
I really appreciated you talking about like your grandmother and I make my grandmother's food. That's something that's very common in Mexico.
Yes.
I grew up with my grandmother in Mexico, and my mother was an amazing cook. But when my grandmother came, there was a fervor that happened in our house because you knew that they were going to throw down.
That's it.
Nonstop. And I'm just wondering, what was it like in your house, cooking in your house when you were growing up?
My mother was my best food teacher, but also she was really strict. She was General Patton. It was, are your hands clean? Are your eyes clean? Is your mind clean? Are your clothes clean? But also, if you did one step ahead of her, she kicked you out of that kitchen faster than Melania kicked Trump out of bed. I said what I said. I'm in the blue state, so I'm okay for now. Tomorrow, welcome back to Virginia. Purple as we can hold it down. But yeah, there was that. My mother and grandmother were very, there's one thing they always got along was the cooking process and shopping process. And so when you're little, you don't want to be around people shopping all day. But now I'm that person who spends 20 minutes with the green beans at the farmer's market going, and the corn, Lord have mercy, I don't know about that. That conversation, right? My grandmother grew stuff. I still have the green thumb. Got like 14 raised beds. I really believe in growing the food. There's a whole chapter in Koshersoul where I talked to Shawnee Mink of the Jewish Farmers Network. And we had an amazing conversation in person, and then later on over Zoom and on the phone about her space as a Jewish woman in farming and how we had commonalities of, in contemporary American Jewish culture, you're going to be a what? A farmer? We don't do that. Black folks, why you want to do that? I don't do that slavery stuff. That's bad. Both sides maybe not connecting to the fact that land and access to land and control of food supply are all forms of power and resistance. But also, she took it a step further by saying, I'm also having to have the conversation about whose land and land recognition and all of globally and domestically. So there was that. But the food part, I have a whole list of plants to grow because I feel like part of the cooking experience that I inherited from my family, and you probably did from yours too, is delayed gratification. The ability to dream about peaches in August and peach cobbler, as opposed to canned peach cobbler. Baby, it ain't the same. I can't do it. I cannot eat a green bean from a can. I don't care if the OU is on it. I can't do it. And it's not snobbery. It's just the fact that, You know what? When you like me, you watching them calories. They better be good calories. They better be useful calories. They better be calories that give you the absolute joy of being alive in this world. So I wanted people to grow things and be able to say, okay, we're growing this, we're doing this. I'm watching the plant grow. I feel like my ancestors. I feel connected. I feel like I can see the whole cycle before me. And so there's that. And so when I talk to folks who have Mexican origins or Filipino origins or Turkish origins, Lebanese, other cultures that are really invested in the kitchen, there's this common language that we have. You know, it's and all of a sudden we understand each other. You know, my winter holidays is always me showing up at my cousin's house for one of many whatevers. And it's me, his ex-wife, his new wife, and ex-wife's next husband. So we have Black, Jewish, Puerto Rican, Italian, Vietnamese. And we throw down. So it's, you know, we're like, okay, who's got the, you know, the arroz con pollo? Who's got the fresh spring rolls and the fried spring rolls? Who's got the pho? Who's got the collard greens? Who's got the brisket? Who's got the fried chicken? We make it all work. And then to see all that food in front of you is ridiculous. You know, and then all the little cousins who look like the entire United Nations running around. It's kind of cool, you know. David's second wife is African American. He's African American. First wife is Vietnamese. They had children together. Now those children are now making them grandparents. So it's something. It's something to see and also appreciate that if you are an American and you are not happily contaminated with the cultures of other Americans, you pretty much failed at being an American. You might as well give it back. I mean, don't make it great again. Just be great now. We won't have no problems. Okay. One last question.
From your experience, why do you suppose that humans struggle so much to embrace intersectionality?
Because it scares the shit out of them. We know we're related. We know that we're bound together. We know. Why are the worst conflicts in the world between people who are the most related? You know, I know people think that nonsense you saw in Tennessee, and by the way, I was in Nashville right when they were expelling the Justins. They think it's, you know, Harry versus Voldemort. No, they're all Slytherin. It's not. These white people in the South are the most related to black people, any of the white people in this country, and absorb most of our culture. We have shared a whole thing for 400 plus years. Stop thinking that we are these two separate teams, and we've absorbed a lot of things. Some of them are not good. That internalized white supremacy, I know where it comes from. But also that internalized sense of they're supposed to be inferior, but I feel inferior to them. You know it. What did Ralph Ellison say? What did Richard Wright say? The Southern white man cannot dream, sleep, think, while referring to the presence of the Negro. So it's there. But also, let's bring it back to black and Jewish stuff, right? Who made the most babies during the civil rights era? Blacks and Jews. Well, so excuse me, Ashkenazi Jews and black Southerners, and black folks from the Great Migration. Where, you know, if only a part of us are counted and assessed as part of the people. And a lot of us run out here, you wouldn't even know. These layers of just like, so you have to be vulnerable, okay? You have to be gracious. You have to be open. You have to be willing to truly live up to what you say you are if you call yourself an American or a member of any other multicultural society like Britain or Canada or Australia or Brazil. etc. But people don't want to do that. It's always us and them. And it's a shame. But I'm not saying that people shouldn't have boundaries. And I'm not saying people shouldn't live their individuality or respect their culture as is. You can't be everything, but you can't be nothing either. Get me? So it's striking that balance between respecting and loving one's neighbor and having a fence around ultimately what you are and your values. And we can all sort of if we did more thinking along those lines instead of trying to be monocultural, we might be the better for it. Because we're not monocultural as we are right now. We just don't want to admit it. So there's that. Sure. Hi.
So I'm sorry, I'll keep it on sweet. When writing your book, did you think about prioritizing or emphasizing certain subjects about whether it be the food, religion, self-identity, or did it even play a factor?
It's a really great question because at first I really wanted to write the magnum opus in all magnum opuses about Black Jewish people. And the problem is that certain people are not going to show up for that. Also, doing that would open me up to kind of people going, I'm going to fact check you. And the reality is that I strive to be unimpeachable. The problem is that because our history is a mosaic, you know when you look at a certain mosaic, because it's pixel technology, right, in stone, if you can get most of the image, you know what it was, even if the stones are missing, but there's still stones that are missing. So being extra accurate and using your imagination can only go so far. And people are not going to let you go so far with that, especially if you're of color. They're going to want to challenge you. The idea that most people have about Jews of color, especially Jews who are Black, is that they're converts or there's some kind of weird appropriation going on or something else that's strange and not quite okay. And to that end, Shais Rishon said something that was really great to me. He told me a story. I think it was about the Rebbe of Metzrich. And he says that the Rebbe of Metrich's mother was in mourning because there was a fire and the Yichus, their family tree, and their pedigree burned. And she said, well, how will we ever know how holy and great our lineage is? He says, the Rebbe of Metrich says, hey, we're going to show them. We're not going to tell them. And going forward, they'll know there was never a court like Metzrich. Same thing with us. The origin stories aren't always as important as the living now and the future of the legacy we leave. Sure, I can tell you some of those incredible origin stories, and they make you question everything you've known about history. But also the food part had to be very important because, if you write a cookbook, and I know it's a great cookbook, I'm going to show people that cookbook and say, here you go. So that's what I did. And I created menus. Some of the menus have recipes from other people's cookbooks listed, but I don't list it because I don't want to have to do copyright stuff. That's the big thing with cooking and authorship. People don't realize something. Recipes are not yours because you write them. It doesn't work that way. Recipes can't be copyrighted in the same way. So somebody can change an ingredient measurement and it's done. It's a whole new product. So you have to be very careful about that, but also to respect other authors and other chefs in that the purity of what they do and giving credit where credit is due. So I want to give extensive menus for every holiday and Juneteenth and the cookout, and Sunday dinner and Friday dinner and Hanukkah and Shabbat, blah, 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 right? And I also want to give context to each recipe. So I was able to hopefully successfully devote a third of the book to food, a third of the book to identity, and a third of the book to the mechanics of spiritual health. And at the end of the day, hopefully I was able to do more. And you always go back and look at your book and go, I missed this. That was not there. I meant to write about that. Oh my God, I forgot to honor so-and-so and mention their name. But that's human. That's the human brain. We're fallible. That's an excellent question. Thank you, Chef Israel.